Seoul never lets you arrive gently. Even when the train slides in on time and the announcement voice stays polite, the city hits you all at once the second the doors open. Light, footsteps, rolling luggage, coffee smell, station music, screens flashing market colors over tired faces. I stepped out with the Busan file in my bag, the card Kwon had given me in my coat pocket, and one ugly thought pressing down harder than anything else. The port mess was not some side fraud. It was connected to the same redevelopment line, reaching for my sister's clinic. Seo walked beside me with her hair tied up in a loose knot that looked like it had been done in the train window. She had slept badly and somehow managed to look sharper because of it. You still look like you're solving math in your head. I'm trying to figure out which part kills us first. She gave me a side glance. You mean legally, financially, or physically? That you had to ask is not helping. We took the escalator up through the crowd and out into the morning cold. Seoul looked washed clean from a distance, glass and steel and neat lines. Up close it was the same as always. Delivery bikes cutting corners, men in navy coats already on their phones, women carrying paper cups and bad news. A city that always seemed to be 10 minutes late and 5 years ahead at the same time. I didn't go home first. I wanted to. I wanted a shower, clean socks, and 30 minutes with the ceiling. But the card from Kwon felt like a live wire. If I let it sit in my pocket too long, I would start inventing reasons to wait. Waiting had a way of turning risk into certainty for the other side. The address was in Yuljiro on a narrow side street where office workers pretended not to notice how many buildings had more locks than signs. The place was on the 4th floor above a stamp shop and a tiny restaurant that smelled like broth and old pepper oil. No company logo, no receptionist, just smoked glass and a plastic panel with 3 names nobody had ever heard of. You really think the harbor money comes through a place like this? Seo asked. That is exactly why I think it does. I pressed the buzzer. No answer. Pressed again. Nothing. I was about to swear and kick the panel when the door clicked open by itself. Inside, the office was smaller than the train bathroom. Metal filing cabinets against one wall, 2 cheap desks, a dead potted plant, a standing fan with dust on the blades. The only thing in the room that looked expensive was the woman sitting at the far end behind a stack of boxes. She had silver hair cut short and straight, no makeup, and the kind of still posture that made everybody else in the room look guilty. She didn't ask who we were. She just looked at the card in my fingers and then at my face. Kwon doesn't send people here for conversation, she said. Her voice was dry and clean, no wasted breath. He said I should come before the week ended if I wanted to know where the harbor money goes after it gets washed. She nodded once like I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Closed the door. We did. She pointed at the 2 plastic chairs in front of the desk. We sat. The room heater rattled in the corner like it wanted to die loudly. My name doesn't matter, she said. The version you can use is Baek. If anybody asks later, you never met me. You found paper in a storage box and got lucky. I can work with lucky. Can you work with ugly? Usually. That finally got the smallest flicker out of her. Not a smile, more like confirmation. She opened the top drawer and slid a folder toward me. The first page was a transport fund briefing deck. I knew it from the future flash on the train window. Same layout, same pale blue divider bar, same soft language trying to make hard theft sound like policy. My chest went cold. There are moments when the future window feels dramatic, like a warning from somewhere above. This wasn't one of them. This felt meaner. It felt like being shown your own handwriting on a crime scene photo before you had entered the room. Seo leaned over. You already saw this. Not the whole thing, just enough. Baek tapped the page with a nail cut almost too short. The harbor contractors in Busan feed loss into a logistics stabilization vehicle. The losses look stupid, but stupid losses are useful. They justify movement. Once the money moves, it reappears in urban transit funds, regional medical redevelopment pools, and pension-linked side mandates. There it was, medical redevelopment pools. My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. How deep does the clinic district go? Depends which clinic. I gave her the district name. She didn't react right away. That reactionlessness told me more than a curse would have. Then you are late, she said. Those 3 words landed harder than anything else that morning. Seo straightened, late how. Baek pulled another sheet from the folder. A map of 4 adjoining blocks, one highlighted in yellow. My sister's clinic sat on the corner of the highlighted zone. Publicly, this is a transport efficiency corridor project. Privately, they are clearing small medical tenants early, depressing valuations, then rolling the lots into a blended redevelopment package before the transit announcement becomes official. Who's they? She glanced at the ceiling like names were hanging there waiting to be billed. A private asset consortium fronted by a respectable infrastructure manager, one assemblyman's policy team, one bank that prefers not to be in photographs, 2 law firms, 3 shell advisory companies, and at least 1 pension liaison who likes golf more than caution. It was the kind of answer that would sound vague to a lazy person. To me, it sounded complete. I flipped pages, contractor lists, internal payment routes, memos with half the names redacted and the other half written so blandly they almost disappeared. One line was underlined in pen, accelerate tenant fatigue before corridor disclosure. I read that line twice. Tenant fatigue. That was how people with clean shirts described cutting the ground out from under regular lives. Why are you giving us this? I asked. Baek folded her hands. Because the men running this used to fear consequences and now they only fear inconvenience. That makes them sloppy. Sloppy men deserve witnesses. That still doesn't explain me. It does from Kwon's side. He said you don't move like a reporter, a broker, or a prosecutor. He said you move like somebody who hates waste. I looked at the folder again. He noticed that. He notices what can bankrupt him. Fair enough. We spent the next 40 minutes in that office while Baek walked us through the money route. Harbor fraud created transport instability losses. Those losses justified emergency capital support. The support moved through side vehicles managed by a firm called Seongjin Urban Logistics. From there, the money landed in redevelopment-linked pools around districts already marked for transit upgrades. Clinics, repair shops, old apartment strips, warehouses. Anything small enough to crush quietly and valuable enough to resell under policy language. Every few pages the same names kept surfacing in different forms. Seongjin, Hedam Infrastructure, Murray Public Transit Advisory, a legal consultant named Han Minyi, and one name that appeared less often but made the others line up around it like nervous employees waiting for the owner to arrive. Director Seo Do-hyun, Special Advisor to the Assembly Transportation Committee. I didn't like names that sounded expensive. By the time we stood to leave, the city outside had brightened from gray to thin white. Baek pulled one final item from the drawer and set it in front of me. A USB drive, cheap plastic, scratched, one strip of masking tape wrapped around it with the number 19 written in blue ink. This is not enough to win, she said, but it is enough to tell whether you are smart or reckless. What happens if I plug it in? You stop being an observer. I slipped it into my pocket. As we headed back toward the elevator, Seo whispered, "You know we're past the point where this is a nice side story and a few trades." We were past that in Busan. Just checking. The elevator doors opened with a dull shake. Inside, the mirrored wall caught my face, and for half a second the reflection changed. Not a full vision, more like a bruise under the image. Same elevator, same tie knot, but my eyes looked more tired and there was blood on the cuff of my shirt. I jerked back so hard Seo caught my sleeve. What? Nothing, bad angle. That wasn't a bad angle, face. I pressed my thumb against the USB through the coat lining. Let's move. Back on the street I called Hirai. She picked up on the 4th ring, already sounding irritated, which meant she was alive and busy and still herself. If this is you asking whether I ate breakfast, the answer is no, and I resent the question. I'm offended you think I'd start with breakfast. Where are you? Clinic, where else would I be? Don't leave any documents in the admin office tonight. Silence. Then what did you do now? I didn't do anything. Just move patient records to the back storage room and make copies of the lease file. Why? Because I asked. That is not an answer. I know, do it anyway. She let out a breath that sounded like a drawer shutting. You only use that voice when something is actually wrong. Then listen to it. Another pause. I could picture her standing at the nurse's station with the phone tucked against her cheek, eyes on the hallway, deciding whether to argue or move first. She always did that. Think fast, act faster. Fine, she said, but you owe me a real explanation this time. I'll come by tonight. You'd better. When the call ended, Yoon Seo was already watching me. You haven't told her. Not enough. You should probably fix that before the city sends demolition language to her front desk. That is also on my list. You have a very bad list. Yes. We split up after noon. She took copies of the briefing deck to a source at a financial paper who owed her 3 favors and 1 apology. I went back to the office pretending to be a normal employee with a normal hangover and a normal concern for quarterly projections. In a city full of performance, mediocrity can be excellent camouflage. The lobby screens at Daehan Securities flashed green and red in their usual little war. Traders moved too fast without ever seeming to go anywhere. Assistants carried binders. Managers carried expressionless faces. The market floor had that dry artificial chill all financial buildings seem to love, like fear keeps better in cold air. I sat down at my terminal, opened 3 harmless spreadsheets, and plugged the USB into a spare laptop I'd bought second-hand precisely for moments like this. The drive contained 6 folders: meeting summaries, loan bridge memos, courier scans, 1 hidden subfolder buried under a fake backup label. That one had audio files. I put in earbuds and played the first one. A man's voice, smooth, educated, the kind that always assumes there is a junior person nearby to clean up the sentence after him. Not asking for exposure, I'm asking for sequencing. Corridor disclosure first. Emergency revision second. Clinic attrition and tenant exhaustion must be complete before public transport linkage enters the retail cycle. Another voice answered, older, tighter. The district still has doctors holding out. Then use compliance. The file ended there. I sat still for a second and looked around the office. Nobody noticed anything. Markets do that to people. If they can't market to screen in the next 30 seconds, they stop seeing it. I opened a pricing terminal and pulled up Seongjin Urban Logistics. Thin trading volume. Easy to move with panic if the right story hit. Then Hedam Infrastructure. Heavier, safer, more political. Then a group of regional construction suppliers already creeping on rumors of transit corridor expansion. The future windows had changed the way I looked at numbers. They weren't numbers first anymore. They were doors, hallways, and people already lying about why they needed them. At 2:17 p.m., the polished edge of my monitor rippled. On the black border beside the chart, I caught a flash of a television in a hospital waiting room. Red banner at the bottom. Urban Corridor, review DELAYED after procurement questions. A man in a dark suit standing behind microphones looked furious and careful at the same time. Then it was gone. I didn't move right away. Overreacting to half a window is how you become a cautionary tale. I built the trade in layers instead. Small short against Seongjin through a derivative sleeve so nobody downstairs would care. Long position in a dull software compliance vendor that sold municipal document systems. Tiny stake in a security printing company used by public agencies. A hedge through a boring insurer that would rise if infrastructure contractors got dragged into review and litigation. Not pretty, useful. The point was not to be brilliant. The point was to be in the room before the room understood its own shape. At 5, the floor thinned out. Managers left for expensive dinners where nobody used the word bribe unless they were joking. I stayed an extra hour pretending to fix a report and copied the audio files to an encrypted drive. By the time I reached Hirai's clinic, the sky had gone dark and the district looked even more temporary than usual. Neon over the fried chicken place. Pharmacy sign blinking on one side. Old brick mixed with cheap glass Renos. Delivery scooters stacked along the curb. The whole block had the tired energy of a place other people had already priced without asking the people inside. Hirai met me at the door with her arms folded. You have 5 seconds before I stop being relieved and start being angry. Fair. 1. There is a redevelopment play moving under this district. 2. It links to the abuse and fraud. Her posture changed, just slightly. She knew enough about my face to tell when I was performing and when I wasn't. 3. Someone wants small tenants out before a transit announcement. She moved aside. Come in. The clinic smelled like antiseptic old paper and the citrus hand cream she always used in winter. Mrs. Choi from reception had already gone home. The waiting room lights were half off. In that dim quiet, the whole place felt smaller than it did during the day. Hirai led me to the admin room and pulled a stack of boxes into view with her foot. I moved the records. I also copied the lease. And before you ask, yes, I backed up the billing fails too. I wasn't going to ask. You were thinking it with your whole forehead. I almost laughed. It felt strange and good and badly timed. I spread the copied map and one of the memos across the desk. She read faster than most people, not because she liked paperwork, because running a clinic teaches you how many disasters hide inside polite formatting. They're calling this corridor efficiency, she said. That is the soft version. And the hard version. They squeeze the block with compliance checks, parking complaints, utility inspections, repair notices, and lease pressure until enough people leave cheap. Then they revalue everything once the transit plan goes public. She read the underlined line about tenant fatigue and looked like she wanted to set the paper on fire. This is criminal. Yes. Do you have anything besides copied paper and your increasingly worrying instincts? I put the encrypted drive on the desk. Audio. She looked up. How bad? Bad enough. She sat down slowly. You know you can't just blow this open if there are patient records anywhere near the blast. I know. Do you? That is literally why I'm here. We stood there in the dim room with the copier humming like a tired insect. The weird thing about family is that fear never sounds as dramatic as it looks. It looks like still hands, a jaw locking, somebody checking the same drawer twice. She rubbed her eyes. What do you need from me? Tell me everything weird that has happened here in the last 2 months. That started a different kind of list. Parking enforcement 3 times in 2 weeks. A surprise fire inspection. Letter from the landlord about potential facade work. Utility company asking questions about meter access. A man in a very good coat pretending to ask about nearby pediatric practices while looking more at the building across the street than at any patient information. Describe him. Late 40s, good watch, smile like he was charging for it. He kept standing half-turned toward the window. I thought about Han Minyi without wanting to. Hirai went on. An orthopedic office 2 doors down suddenly closing. A dentist deciding not to renew. Rumor that the bakery owner got offered cash to leave early if he didn't make trouble. It was not one event. It was pressure. Continuous, low, deniable pressure. The kind respectable people love because it lets them talk about market forces later. When I left the clinic, she walked me outside and touched my sleeve before I got into the cab. Don't do the thing where you decide you can carry all of this because you're the one who noticed it. What thing? She gave me the exact sister look I had earned over years. That thing. I'll try not to. No, actually don't. I promised because not promising would have been worse. 2 nights later, Yunseo called at 6:11 a.m. with no greeting. The compliance vendor you bought yesterday is up 8% pre-open. Also, your newspaper source didn't call back because he got a visit from legal before he even had time to pretend to be brave. I was still half asleep on the sofa with the laptop open on my chest. Good morning to you too. Get dressed. The city council agenda for Friday just changed. That woke me up properly. At the station cafe, she slid a printed agenda across the table. Buried in item 12 under waste routing access and road use variants was a closed session consultation request for special medical corridor harmonization review. That was the sort of phrase built by committees specifically, so ordinary humans would never feel the knife entering. They're moving faster, I said. Or they think nobody is watching. Same thing. She stirred her coffee once and left the spoon against the saucer. My source at the paper is scared. My source at the ministry is pretending he never heard of me, but I did get one useful thing. Han Minyi is hosting a private investor briefing tonight in Gangnam. Small room, no press, mostly family offices, 1 private bank and a few preferred clients. About the corridor. Officially, urban resilience and medium-term transit adjacency. Unofficially, rich people being told where the city will pretend not to have already made decisions. I checked the time. Can we get in? She gave me a look that meant yes, and don't ask how in the same breath. The briefing was on the 21st floor of a building whose lobby smelled like marble cleaner and old money trying to look modern. They gave us white badges with a fake asset advisory logo and directed us toward a conference room overlooking the river. I wore the kind of suit that made me look expensive enough to enter and forgettable enough to ignore. Seo had changed her hair, glasses, and posture so completely that even I did a second take when I saw her by the elevator. Inside, everything was soft and muted in the way only very expensive rooms can manage. Gray carpet, frosted water glasses, screens hidden behind wood panels, quiet servers moving trays like the future had already signed the catering invoice. Han Min-yi was exactly the kind of man Hirai would hate on sight. He had perfect posture, a careful amount of silver at the temples, and the easy delivery of somebody who had never heard the word no without assuming it was the start of a negotiation. He began with macro pressure, consumer rotation, urban strain, policy modernization, the usual polished nonsense. Then he shifted to district repositioning opportunities and put up a slide showing 4 blocks in simplified color code. One of those blocks was Hirai's district with the street names removed. I didn't need a vision to know what I was looking at. Sometimes plain corruption is generous enough to introduce itself. He kept talking about mobility corridors, healthcare clustering, and early volatility discounts. In the language of rich men, theft always becomes a timing opportunity. I took notes like I was mildly interested. Beside me, a woman in pearls whispered to her husband that the medical cluster angle looked underpriced. 2 seats over, a young fund manager typed numbers into his phone under the table. There it was. The retail cycle hadn't started, but the preferred cycle had. Halfway through the presentation, the side screen near the window turned dark between slides and I saw it again. Not the room we were in. The same room later, chairs empty, water glasses tipped over, Han on the phone by the window, voice sharp for once. And on the main screen behind him, a paused news clip with one phrase frozen on the banner, leaked audio. My pulse flattened instead of jumping. I had learned that panic wastes detail. I leaned back and wrote one line in my notebook like I was reminding myself to call a client. Give audio to nobody who loves timing more than truth. When the session ended, a junior staffer led select attendees to a smaller lounge for private follow-up. We were not select attendees. Fine by me. The hallway mattered more. The hallway tells you who hurries, who hides, and who believes the room belongs to them. We were halfway to the elevator when Han himself stepped out of the smaller lounge speaking into his phone. He wasn't looking at us. He was annoyed enough to be careless. Don't touch the clinic zone until after Friday. If one tenant files early injunction, I don't want it attached to the corridor paper. Push enforcement through sanitation if you have to. He turned the corner and vanished. Seo's eyes flicked to mine. Please tell me you got that, I murmured. She tapped the pen clipped inside her folder. Beautiful. The elevator doors opened. As we stepped in, the mirrored wall flashed silver and suddenly became a different elevator. Same dimensions, different faces. 2 men in dark jackets with municipal badges, one of them holding a notice stamped in red. The notice was being handed to Mrs. Choi at Hirai's clinic. Then it was gone. I hit Hirai's number before we reached the lobby. She answered breathless, now what? Did anyone come by today from the city? No, but the landlord's assistant called twice. Lock the admin room. If anyone with a badge comes in tomorrow, you don't sign anything, not one thing. You really know how to improve a week. I am trying. Back outside, Gangnam traffic moved like polished frustration under the streetlights. I stood on the curb for a second and watched men in expensive coats step into expensive cars while talking about policy like it was weather. Seo tucked the pen recorder deeper into her bag. We have audio from the office. We have audio from Han. We have maps, fund routes, and enough smoke to choke a committee. We still don't have a clean path. Then make one. That was the problem. Clean paths are rare. Useful paths are everywhere. The next morning I sold part of the Seongjin short into weakness and rotated the profit into 3 other positions the new information supported. Not because I was getting greedy, because if the district fight turned public, I was going to need cash fast. Legal cash, deposit cash, rent protection cash. The kind that keeps ordinary people from being forced to accept ugly terms just because the calendar moved first. By noon, I had a plan ugly enough to work. Step 1. Isolate the district pressure campaign from the bigger corridor fraud, at least on paper. Step 2. Put just enough information in front of the right lawyer to trigger injunction risk. Step 3. Leak part of the investor briefing angle to spook soft money out of the private side. Step 4. Hold the main audio until the public room was already unstable. At 1:40 p.m. Kwon called for the first time since Busan. You went to the address. Yes. And you should have mentioned Baek in Joy's existential tone. A short laugh came through the line. That means she liked you. She does not strike me as a person who likes anybody. That is why it means something. I walked out to the fire stairs with the phone. What do you want? Someone in Seoul asked whether you are emotional. That made me go very still. About what? About a medical district. The stairwell suddenly felt colder than the office. Who asked? He took a second too long. A man who does not usually repeat himself. Then repeat him for me. Han's people are making inquiries, not to move on you directly, to map your pressure points. I looked down the narrow concrete steps, each one painted with a yellow edge that seemed too bright. Why tell me? Because if they push family before finance, the market side becomes impossible to read. That was his version of honesty. Fine. Do you know when? No, but I know they will prefer paperwork to violence at first, polite pressure, administrative language, neighbors who suddenly care about parking, that kind of thing. I already know that kind. Then know this too. If Seo Do-hyun enters the room personally, it means the corridor is not the main objective. It means the corridor is cover. The call ended there. I stood in the stairwell another 10 seconds and understood two ugly things at once. First, they had seen enough of my movement to start looking at my family. Second, the district might not even be the final prize. It might just be the right patch of land sitting over somebody else's much bigger route. That night I met a lawyer named Park Yoon-mai in a noodle place behind the courthouse because Yoon Seo swore she trusted nothing discussed in cleaner restaurants. Park wore no jewelry, ate fast, and interrupted bad explanations before they finished. Good start. She read the district memo, the map, and a summary of the audio without touching the broth. If this is real, they are trying to create anticipatory tenant exit before public disclosure. That sounds illegal. It sounds common. Can you stop it? I can slow it, maybe. Hell. Get me one signed notice, one provable pressure action, and one tenant willing to state that they were approached under false regulatory pretext. I thought about the bakery owner. Park nodded as if she had read my face. You don't need 10 people. You need one person who is tired, angry, and still brave enough to sign before the story turns expensive. Outside, the air was sharp enough to cut. We walked 2 blocks in silence before Yoon Seo said what both of us were already thinking. The bakery owner. Probably. And if he backs out? Then we find the dentist, or the orthopedic office, or we make the city show its hand. She shoved both hands in her coat pockets. You always sound calm right before you do something that ruins everybody's weekend. I save the dramatic tone for more personal occasions. That finally got a grin out of her. The bakery owner turned out to be harder than I hoped and more useful than I expected. Mr. Nam had the broad shoulders of someone who had carried flour for 30 years, and the eyes of someone who had recently learned what paperwork can do to a person. He led us into the back room after closing, flour still dusting his sleeves. I already told the men in suits I am not interested. We are not men in suits, I said. He looked at my coat, debatable. Fair? He listened while I laid out the simple version, pressure before disclosure, below-market buyout offers, city language being used before city action. When I mentioned the corridor briefing, his expression changed. They said transportation too, he muttered. Not directly. One of them told me foot traffic would change structurally, Next year, and I should be smart before other merchants got emotional. Did you keep the card? He pointed at a tin near the fridge. I opened it and found 2 business cards, one folded note, and a photo of his daughter in graduation robes. One card had the logo of a consulting firm I had seen in the USB files. Useful. He wasn't ready to sign that night. I didn't push. People who spend their lives building something small do not hand trust to strangers because the strangers sound urgent. They hand it over when they run out of room to keep pretending the danger is abstract. The next push came for him before the week ended. A sanitation notice, 3 pages, technical language, compliance deadline absurdly short. He called me before he called his brother. That was how we got our first signed statement. Friday morning arrived with the bad energy of a room trying to act normal around a secret. The city building downtown had too much glass and not enough humanity. Guards at the entrance, civil servants with tablets, private assistants holding folders for men who like being recognized. I did not go inside with Yoon Seo. That would have been stupid. She could pass closer to the press line. I had another job. Across the street, in a rental office above a stationery shop, Park Yoon-mi prepared the injunction filing using Mr. Nam's statement, Hirai's lease evidence, and one utility notice that had arrived at the clinic at 8:12 a.m. that same day. Timing like that is the sort of gift corruption gives itself when it believes nobody has linked the pieces. At 9:36 my phone buzzed, Yoon Seo. Han is here, so is a deputy from Seo's office, bigger than we thought. I looked out the window at the city building entrance and saw both of them step out of black sedans like the day belonged to them. Maybe it did for another hour. Park signed the filing packet and slid it to her junior. Run this now, not later, not after coffee, now. The junior bolted. I called Hirai. Any badges yet? 2 men came 10 minutes ago. I made them wait in the lobby and called the landlord in front of them. They got annoyed and left. You didn't sign? Are you kidding? I made them spell their names twice. Good. I hung up and checked the market. Seongjin soft, Heedham flat, compliance vendor still climbing. The calm before public language always feels fake once you know what is about to hit. Then the window on the office door beside me flashed. Not a market chart this time. A courthouse hallway. Park Yoon-mi arguing with a clerk. A television mounted in the corner already showing Han's face. And behind the ticker, a second line I hadn't seen before. Clinic tenants seek emergency injunction. I turned back to the room. We need one more push, I said. Park looked up from her laptop. What kind? Media. She didn't even ask why. She had already learned not to. Yoon Seo timed it exactly the way only reporters with dangerous instincts can. Not a full leak, not the explosive audio, just enough. Investor briefing, preferred clients, transit adjacency language, medical corridor mention, questions about selective disclosure before public process. She dropped it through a digital desk at a cable business show whose producers liked scandal as long as it arrived wearing numbers. By 11:14, one anchor had already asked on air whether certain Seoul districts were being softly prepositioned for private money before formal review. That was all it took. Not because television is powerful, because television gives cowards permission to become curious together. Han came out of the city building at 11:41 looking smooth from a distance and furious if you knew where to look. The right side of his neck went tight when he was angry. I had noticed it at the briefing. My phone buzzed with another message from Yoon Seo. He just killed the press line and went back inside. Something moved. Good. When the first article hit about selective investor access, Seongjin dropped 3% in 20 minutes. Small at a market level, terrifying at a corruption level. Bad men hate movement they did not authorize. By afternoon, Park had the injunction stamped. Temporary review pending district disclosure fairness. It wasn't a win. It was a wedge. Sometimes wedges matter more than swords. I spent that evening at Hirai's clinic, helping move boxes into the back room, while she dictated patient call notes to Mrs. Choi like the world wasn't trying to price them out by Monday. The ordinary parts of resistance never look impressive. Tape guns, file labels, instant coffee, somebody climbing a stool to pull old contracts from a top shelf. But that is what most fights are, not speeches, Not music, just people refusing to leave quietly while fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Around 8, Mrs. Choi waved a stapler at me. If your clever little finance war gets my appointment system audited again, you are paying for dinner for a month. That seems fair. It was not a joke. I know. She liked me more after that. Later, while Hirai checked the medicine fridge, I walked into the dark waiting room and stood by the front window. The district outside looked the same as it had a week ago, but now I could see the pressure lines under it, which storefronts had been approached, which lights stayed off too long, which parked cars weren't local. The glass caught my reflection and then replaced it with somewhere else. Snow outside a high office window, 5 phones ringing, my own hand signing a trade ticket, television volume low but urgent, and on the desk, right beside the trade ticket, a thick presentation file stamped National Mobility Reserve. I blinked and the waiting room came back. This was bigger again. The first time the future showed me a stock chart, I thought it was an exception. By then I knew better. The windows were not getting kinder, they were widening. I didn't tell Hirai what I had seen, not that night. She already had enough weight in her hands. The weekend turned into a sprint. Seo chased ministry calls. Park built the injunction into a broader tenant protection angle. Mr. Nam finally agreed to go on record if his face stayed off camera. The dentist 2 doors down admitted he had been pushed to accept an early exit at a valuation so low it was basically an insult typed on letterhead. And the market kept leaking its own little truths. Seongjin unstable, Heedam defensive. A construction supplier tied to corridor paving quietly bid up by idiots chasing rumor. I sold them my stupidity at a profit and used the cash to secure a backup lease option for Hirai 2 districts away just in case the block became physically unusable. I hated doing it. Backup plans feel like surrender when you're tired, but tired people still need backup plans. Sunday night, I got the call from Kwon that changed the scale again. There is a meeting tomorrow, he said. With who? A family office, not public, not officially connected to the corridor. They want to know who has been moving around the edges before the main fund rotation. How nice for them. You should care because one of the attending names is Seo, Jun-T's brother-in-law. That made the room smaller. Where? He named a private dining room in Apgujeong. Of course he did. Money loves privacy, but it loves convenience more. What do they know about me? Enough to ask whether the Dehan Jr. trader is lucky or guided. Lucky is my favorite rumor. Then keep it alive. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the scribbled map of relationships I had built over the last few days. Harbor fraud, transport losses, redevelopment pool, preferred briefing, district pressure, family office interest, national mobility reserve. It was no longer just about exposing a dirty corridor deal or protecting a single clinic block. It was about a larger machine using public need, market timing, and private knowledge as one continuous pipeline. The port had fed it. The district was feeding it. Something above both was waiting with cleaner shoes. I slept for 3 hours, woke up with a headache, and still made it to the private dining room 20 minutes early. The restaurant looked like every expensive place designed by somebody who hates noise. Stone walls, low amber lighting, private rooms hidden behind sliding wood partitions. You could ruin a district in a place like that and still compliment the fish. Kwon sat at the bar alone with tea instead of whiskey, which told me the night mattered. You clean up well, he said. So do criminals with budgets. He accepted that without protest. Inside the private room, 4 men and 1 woman were already seated around a low table. Nobody introduced themselves by full title because people at that level assume titles are either known or irrelevant. The woman ran a boutique family office. 1 man handled structured products at a bank too large to fear embarrassment. Another looked like retired military until he began speaking in real estate abbreviations. The youngest man in the room said the least and watched the most. That usually means family. I was there as a curiosity, a small market operator who had made a few good rotations around transport and logistics names before the public story formed. They wanted to know whether I was lucky enough to exploit or useful enough to recruit. The conversation moved in circles around policy without admitting policy, around land without saying land, around risk without saying ordinary people. Then the youngest man finally looked at me and asked, "How do you build conviction before public confirmation?" There are many wrong answers to that question. Most of them sound smart. "I don't wait for confirmation," I said. "I wait for behavior." He tilted his head. "Whose behavior?" "People who already know the official story and still act like they need a softer price." That changed the room. Not much, enough. The woman smiled into her tea. "And if their behavior is hidden?" "It never is. It just moves through channels boring enough that nobody wants to stare for long." Kwon didn't look at me. "Good man." The young one drummed his fingers once on the table. "You talk like somebody who has either seen too much too early or lost money the expensive way." "Both are good teachers." That got a real laugh from the banker. Dinner stayed civil, but the point had already landed. They were testing for pattern recognition and nerve. I gave them enough of both to be remembered and not enough to be owned. As we stepped out into the corridor later, the young man stopped beside me. "You have family in the West Medical District?" Not a question. The air between those words and my next breath felt like a cliff edge. "I have family in many districts," I said. He almost smiled. "Take care with that one." He walked away before I could decide whether it was a threat, a courtesy, or both. Outside, the night air felt too clean. Kwon joined me at the curb. "That was not an accident." I figured. He doesn't usually bother with hints. "What's his name?" Kwon looked up at the building front. "Seo Do-hyun." Related enough, bad enough. Back home, I sat in the dark and replayed the line again. Take care with that one. The kind of sentence polite people use when they want to pretend they are doing you a favor by describing the knife. I should have felt fear first. Instead, I felt clarity. Once the wealthy stop speaking around the thing and begin speaking at it, the room has changed. That means your next move can change too. The next morning, I sold down part of my safer positions and opened a larger one against Hedom through a channel that would not point back to my desk right away. Risky, yes, but if the family office side was already using soft pressure, then the leak cycle would not end with one cable segment and one injunction. It would widen. The bigger funds would start protecting themselves. Protection has a market signature. Everybody calls it prudence afterward. In the moment, it looks like betrayal wearing a risk model. At 10, Yoon Seo burst into the small coffee shop where I was working and dropped into the chair across from me hard enough to shake the table. Good news first or bad news first? There is no version of that question where good news is good. Fair, bad news first. Han is pushing back through an intermediary on Mr. Nam. Someone offered to settle his sanitation problem if he withdrew the statement. I nodded, and the good. She held up her phone. A member of the Assembly Committee just requested internal review on selective district disclosure. Off the record for now, but real. That was not good. That was useful, close enough. We spent the rest of the day running between small rooms where the future of cities usually gets decided without cameras. Legal copier shop, neighborhood tax office, side cafe near City Hall, basement records archive. The visual part of corruption is always terrible and ordinary. Beige walls, bad lighting, plastic seals on boxes, people carrying folders like they are carrying groceries. By evening I had enough to see the shape, but not yet enough to break it. Then the city delivered the next mistake for free. A notice arrived at Hirai Clinic citing pedestrian safety review tied to anticipated corridor modification. Anticipated. That word should not have been there. Not before public confirmation. Somebody had copied internal language too early. Hirai took a photo and sent it to me with one message. Tell me this is useful before I start screaming. I called her at once. It's useful. Great, I'm still going to scream. Do it after you email me the full scan. That notice gave Park exactly what she needed. Publicly unconfirmed project language used in tenant-facing pressure. The injunction widened by the hour. The first full television segment hit that night. Not explosive, not heroic, better than that. Calm, detailed. A business anchor with a pleasant voice asking why a medical district had received corridor-adjacent pressure before any official transit disclosure, and whether preferred investors had been offered early positioning around that possibility. On screen behind her was one blurred slide from the Gangnam briefing. The moment I saw Han's old slide turned into a television background graphic, I knew the room had shifted for good. My monitor at home reflected the anchor's face and then flickered. There it was again, snow outside the high office, 5 phones, my hands signing the trade ticket, but this time the television wasn't saying emergency in a vague way. It was naming a fund freeze. National Mobility Reserve temporarily suspends redemptions pending internal review. I wrote the phrase down at once. The freeze hadn't happened yet. The fund hadn't been named publicly, but the future had just moved from district pressure to national structure. If that was coming, then everything below it would thrash first. I barely slept. The next 2 days became the kind of run where time stops feeling vertical. Morning, noon, night, all one sheet of paper with numbers and calls scribbled across it. A bank analyst note hinted at governance concerns in non-core transit vehicles. Seongjin fell again. Heedham denied any irregularity in 2 tight paragraphs full of verbs that meant nothing. The family office side started exiting smaller names quietly. That was the loudest thing they could have done. I kept trading, but with my eyes on protection more than profit. Buy fear where it had reason. Sell optimism where it was still expensive. Build cash. Keep it liquid. On Wednesday evening, Park called while I was walking out of the office. They want to mediate. Who? Through intermediaries, the district landlord group. They are offering temporary rent support and voluntary relocation assistance. I laughed once with no humor in it. Voluntary. Exactly. What does Hirai say? She says if they say voluntary one more time in front of her, she will throw a chair. That's my sister. Yes, I noticed. When I arrived at the clinic, Hirai was in the break room with her sleeves rolled up and a paper cup crushed flat in one hand. They sent a smiling woman with a brochure, she said before I even sat down. Do you understand how insulting brochures are in moments like this? Extremely. She called it an opportunity to transition early into a growth corridor. Mrs. Choi leaned in from the doorway. I told her our opportunity was to leave by the front entrance before I escorted her with a mop. I like her, Yunseo whispered. You are late to that party, Hirai muttered. We sat around the break room table with tea, bad instant coffee, and copies of the latest filings. It felt ridiculous and very real at the same time. That was the new rhythm. Money at national scale, plastic tablecloth in a neighborhood clinic. Both true, same story. I finally told Hirai more about the visions that night than I had planned to. Not everything, but enough. She stared at me for a long second after I finished. Not like I was crazy. Worse, like she was rearranging years of memory to see where this impossible thing might have started. The headaches after the generator accident. Yes. And the weird timing with the subway crash. Yes. And all those times you suddenly told people not to sign, or not to buy, or to leave 5 minutes early. I didn't realize how obvious that looked. It looked very weird. Fair. She sat back and rubbed both hands over her face. I don't know whether to be angry that you hid this or terrified that it's real. You can alternate. I probably will. Then she looked at me the way older sisters sometimes do, when they decide to skip shock and jump straight to practical damage control. Are the visions always right? No. How wrong? Wrong enough that I don't trust them by themselves, right enough that I don't ignore them. That answer seemed to help a little. Fine, she said, then we use them like weather, not destiny. That was the smartest thing anybody had said to me all week. Once you start thinking of the future like weather, a lot of fake heroism falls away. You stop trying to control everything. You start trying to read pressure, fronts, weak roofs, bad roads, and who still needs to be indoors before the storm. The storm announced itself Friday morning. At 9:03, a major paper published a piece on privileged district briefings and unexplained pre-disclosure positioning by selected investors in medical-adjacent zones. No full audio, no direct accusation strong enough for immediate defamation fireworks, just enough source detail to make every compliance department in Seoul suddenly remember it had a pulse. At 9:17, Heatum dropped 5%. At 9:21, my phone filled with 3 different kinds of messages. People pretending concern, people fishing for information, people acting like they had never heard the district name in their lives. At 9:33, Seo called from outside a ministry building. They're not denying the briefing, they're denying the intent. Then they are weaker than yesterday. Agreed. Also, someone from Seo's office just used the phrase narrative opportunism on camera. I almost smiled. That phrase has never helped anyone. At 10:02, the first rumor hit about irregular side allocations inside a mobility reserve subfund. My pulse slowed. Not because I was calm, because I recognized the edge of the thing the window had already shown me. I added to the Heatum position and built a protective long in a rival infrastructure, manager likely to benefit if money needed somewhere respectable to flee. Then I called Kwon. Is Seo running? No, but men around him are moving boxes. What kind of boxes? Paper first, then money. Good enough. Around noon, the city announced a temporary pause on non-essential administrative actions in the West Medical District pending procedural clarification. Small sentence, massive meaning. At the clinic, Mrs. Choi printed the notice and taped it inside the admin room like it was a war trophy. Hirai sent me a photo with the caption, "We are framing this if we survive." I wrote back, "Use a cheap frame, we are not done." At 1:14, the vision came while I was staring at a dull spreadsheet full of transport debt durations. The screen surface darkened, snow at the window, 5 phones, trade ticket, National Mobility Reserve. This time one more detail came through, a name on the lower right corner of the file cover. Executive Review, Chairman Moon. Then the spreadsheet came back. Chairman Moon. I knew the name. Everybody in finance knew the name. Moon Tae-wook, honorary chair of a financial holding company that publicly claimed only advisory distance from most operational funds and privately appeared whenever something expensive needed cover. That was the first moment I understood how high the ceiling really was. I stared at the name until the letters stopped looking like letters. Then I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote the only sentence that mattered. The next fight is not about saving one block. It is about breaking the room that keeps building them. I tore the page out and folded it into my wallet. Not because I thought paper made it safer, because some names feel different once you write them by hand. They stop being rumor and start taking up physical space in your pocket. When I got outside, the city looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Cars, steam from food carts, men smoking near loading docks, women crossing intersections with one hand on a phone and the other around a paper cup. That was the insulting part of scale. The machinery above regular life gets larger and colder, and the street still looks normal. Seo was waiting by the curb, with 2 cans of coffee she had pulled from a vending machine. You look like you just found out the house has another basement. It does. She handed me a can. Who? Chairman Moon. She didn't open hers right away. Moon Tae-wook. That one. For a second she just stared at me. No smart line, no joke. Then she cracked the can and took a hard sip. If you are wrong, I will spend a week mocking you. If I'm right, you'll spend a month not sleeping. That part is already happening. We walked without deciding on a direction. Sometimes movement helps thought feel less stuck. I told her about the file cover, the snow, the phones, the trade ticket. She had heard enough by then that she no longer treated the visions like a confession. She treated them like bad weather reports, which was useful. What connects Moon directly? She asked. Nothing clean yet. Then we don't say the name outside rooms with locked doors. I know. No, really, I need you to know that with your bones. I know with my bones. That satisfied her enough to keep going. We spent the next 3 days building around a name we could not yet touch. That meant working the levels below it harder. Seo's office, hands structuring, Heatum's advisory chains, the reserve sub-funds, family office positioning. We moved like people taking apart a wall from the bottom because the ceiling above it might collapse if hit directly. The city gave us more than I expected. Once the district pause became public, smaller people inside the machine started protecting themselves. Clerks turned slower. Managers sent shorter emails. Consultants stopped calling from their usual numbers. Fear is useful because it breaks routine, and routine is where powerful people hide. One of the first cracks came from a man named IM who handled records retention for a mid-tier legal vendor. I never met him in person the first time. He sent Seo a message from a throwaway account with a photo of a shredding schedule and one sentence. Ask why they need weekend disposal after a district pause. That was enough to pull us into Mapo on a freezing Saturday morning to watch a box truck back into the service entrance of a records facility that officially only handled standard retention overflow. The building was so plain it almost disappeared. Beige walls, blue sign, security camera above the loading gate. A place built to make documents feel already forgotten. Seo stood beside me at the bus stop across the street, with a scarf wrapped up to her nose. This is your favorite kind of evil, isn't it? Beige. Paper evil. The kind that thinks if it uses enough folders no one will call it theft. I don't enjoy it, I just understand it. That is not reassuring. The truck reversed up to the dock. Two men in thermal jackets rolled out gray bins with locked lids, no logos, no labels. One of them smoked while he worked, which told me the job wasn't normal. People are careful around normal disposal. They get sloppy around panic disposal. I watched the loading rhythm. One bin, pause, another bin, longer pause, third bin with two handlers instead of one. Heavier, I murmured. Because paper isn't the only thing inside. She lowered the camera. Hard drives. Maybe. The side mirror of a parked van across the street caught the light and flashed. In the silver angle, I saw the service alley 10 minutes later, police tape at the gate, and one gray bin split open with a rain of file folders and something dark mixed in. Blood. The image vanished. I grabbed her sleeve. We don't stay for the whole show. That got her moving fast. We crossed the intersection, cut behind a pharmacy, and took the long way around the block. Not because I suddenly wanted heroics, because if the alley was going to turn ugly, I wanted in before the cleanup and out before the excuse. Behind the records building, the service lane narrowed between concrete walls with old damp stains and stacks of blue recycling crates. We heard the shouting before we saw the men. One of the handlers was on the ground by the third gray bin clutching his forearm. The other was swearing into his phone. Beside them, a metal case had fallen open, hard drives scattered across the wet pavement. Not an accident then. The man on the ground looked more shocked than hurt. Blood ran between his fingers and dripped onto the bin lid. Knife cut, quick, meant to stop, not to kill. I didn't think. I moved. Compression first, I told Seo, dropping to one knee. She was already pulling the scarf free and wrapping his arm tighter than either of us had any right to know how to do. What happened? I asked. He looked at me with the dazed hatred injured men reserve for strangers who arrive too fast. Bike, helmet, grabbed the case and slipped. Not enough. The other man stepped toward the drives. I stood up before he reached them. Leave them. He stared at me. Who are you? Someone who just kept your coworker from bleeding onto your shoes. Leave them. Authority is often just timing plus volume. He backed off. Sirens were still far away. Good, far away means choices. Seo was already using her phone one-handed, taking pictures while keeping pressure on the wound. I crouched by the open case and saw labels printed on each drive sleeve. Retention backup, advisory video archive, committee brief room, reserve allocation review. The last one made my pulse kick once. Reserve allocation review. I palmed one of the smaller drives while the other man shouted into the phone again about emergency response. Not elegant, necessary. By the time actual responders arrived, I was just another worried bystander helping lift a bleeding man onto a stretcher. Nobody remembers the face of the person carrying one corner of panic unless they have to. Back in the cab, Seo kept one hand flat on her knee to stop it bouncing. You stole it. Borrowed. You always say that right before the word police becomes a possibility. We are doing great. That is the opposite of what is happening. At my apartment, we dumped the stolen drive onto the kitchen table next to instant noodles, invoices, and 3 uncapped pens. Glamour is fake. Most dangerous work looks like bad housekeeping. The drive was encrypted, but not well enough for somebody who knew what lazy compliance teams call secure when deadlines get ugly. It took 2 hours, one borrowed script, and a lot of swearing, but the folders finally opened. Meeting clips, boardroom camera angles, slide decks, audio from advisory sessions. We clicked through in silence until one file stopped both of us. Title: NMR Executive Alignment, Closed Review. NMR, National Mobility Reserve. The video opened on a conference room I had already seen in the vision. Snow outside, 5 phones on the side credenza, a long glass table. At the head of it sat Han Minyi. 2 seats down sat Seo Do-hyun, and at the far end, almost half in shadow, Moon Tae-wook himself. Not honorary distance, not advisory haze. In the room, hands folded, listening while others explained how district volatility and transport restructuring could be used to improve private entry pricing before broad public participation. My throat went dry. Moon only spoke twice in the clip, but both times the room rearranged around him. The problem, he said at one point calm as weather, is not legality. Legality is modular. The problem is sequence. If clinics resist before corridor language hardens, sentiment rises in the wrong order. He said sentiment like he was discussing rain. Later, when Han suggested softening the district schedule after the Busan noise, Moon barely looked up from the paper in front of him. Do not confuse noise with danger. Danger begins when small people decide the process is personal. I replayed that line twice. Small people. Yoon Seo was already downloading copies to 2 separate drives. We need air gaps, and we need backups in places no polite man will search first. I know. She looked at me over the laptop lid. Do not go stupid with this. I wasn't planning to. Good, because this is the first thing we've had that turns the whole machine into one room. We didn't leak it right away. That was the hard part, not because I wanted drama, because once a clip like that leaves your hand, the counterattack begins before the public meaning settles. To use it well, we needed position, protection, and a path. So we got practical. Park Yoon-mi helped place sealed copies with 2 separate council contacts under privilege review language broad enough to discourage immediate theft. Hirai moved the clinic billing archive offsite for a week under the excuse of a software update. Mr. Nam agreed to appear on camera with his face visible if 2 other tenants did the same. They did, after a beauty salon owner on the corner got a surprise water shutoff notice and stopped pretending she could stay neutral. The district started looking different after that. Not safer, more awake, posters in shop windows, printed notices taped inside doors, people pausing on the sidewalk to compare stories. Once regular people realize the same clean shoe has stepped on all of them, the room changes fast. I still traded through all of it. That sounds colder on paper than it felt in my body. The truth is I needed the money, and the market was telling the same story in a different language. Hedom widened. A regional bank with reserve exposure started moving like a man smiling through dental pain. Municipal printing vendors stayed strong. A dull software firm that nobody would ever romanticize kept climbing because every frightened committee on earth suddenly needed clean document systems and audit trails. Money in moments like that is not victory, it is oxygen. Oxygen buys time. Monday morning, the first man in a dark coat came to the office asking about me by name. I saw him through the glass wall before reception called up. Early 50s, coat too good for the weather, shoes with city salt on them but no hurry, not police, not media, the kind of messenger institutions send when they want the conversation to feel optional. I told reception I was in a meeting and watched him wait for 6 full minutes before leaving a business card. CEO Advisory Strategy Office. Not subtle. I took the stairs down instead of the elevator and found him outside under the overhang. You're persistent. He turned without surprise, Mr. Kang. That was the first time in a while someone had used my name with no warmth and no uncertainty. It is strange how much threat can fit inside correct pronunciation. What do you want? An opportunity to prevent unnecessary misunderstanding. I dislike opportunities. He ignored that. The district review has become emotionally crowded. Certain parties are encouraging overinterpretation. People get emotional when their leases are used as bait. His gaze didn't shift, and markets get emotional when ambitious juniors mistake turbulence for leverage. So that was the tone: family first, job second, soft threat wrapped in career advice. I tucked my hands in my coat pockets. If this is where you imply concern for my future, save the breath. You people only notice futures you can invoice. A tiny crease appeared near his left eye. Not anger, recalculation. You should not assume every room is hostile. You should not assume I only know one room exists. That one landed. He handed me the card anyway. There will be a review dinner on Thursday, smaller than the last one. Serious people prefer to understand whether a moving part is aligned, ignorant, or adversarial. I looked at the card and then back at him. Which one should I be? That depends how much you value your sister's stability. He walked away after saying it, which was smart. Threats echo louder when the speaker doesn't stay to defend them. I stood there under the overhang with buses hissing past and office workers flowing around me, and I felt something settle into place. Not rage. Rage burns too hot and too short. This was cleaner. A line. You can threaten me. Fine. The city does that every day. The market does it every second. But the moment you decide to lay your hand on family and call it advice, you stop being a puzzle and become a target. That Thursday dinner could have been a trap, a test, or both, which meant I had to go. Before that, I needed two more things. 1. Protection around Hirai that did not look like protection. 2. A cleaner understanding of Seo Do-hyun. The first part was easier. We recruited the district itself. Mr. Nam let us use the bakery back room after closing. Hirai brought tea. Mrs. Choi brought copies of every strange notice the clinic had received. The salon owner brought a stack of water service emails. A repair shop owner brought surveillance footage of two suited men photographing the block at 7 a.m. for no stated reason. Nobody called it organizing because ordinary people hate sounding dramatic when they're still paying rent. But that was what it was. I stood by the flour sacks and whiteboard, while the little room steamed with body heat and bread smell, and said the simplest version I could. They are counting on each of you feeling separate. Different lease, different problem, different bad week. The second you stop being separate, they lose speed. That line worked because it was true, and because everybody in the room had already felt the same pressure from a different door. We set up a phone tree, shared notice scans, one lawyer contact, one emergency lock change company, one local assembly aide willing to pretend he had discovered the district issue on his own. Pride is useful if you know how to feed it the right material. By the time the meeting ended, the district still wasn't safe, but it was no longer passive. That mattered. The second part, Seo Do-hyun, came through a source I did not expect. Baek called me herself. Come alone, she said. That makes me nervous. Good, 7 p.m. same office. When I got there, the room looked even barer than before. One filing cabinet stood open. The dead plant was gone, which somehow made the whole place feel more serious. Baek didn't ask me to sit this time. She slid a folder across the desk and kept her hand on it. Do you know why Seo's brother-in-law matters? Because rich relatives always matter. No, because he is not family decoration. He runs the unofficial side for men who prefer to keep their signatures ceremonial. That matched the dinner invitation, already burning in my coat pocket. She opened the folder herself. Inside were photos, registration records, and one chart that mapped Shell property holdings around districts linked to transit speculation over the last 8 years. The pattern was obvious once seen. Advisory firms entering early, consultants pressing small tenants, clean buyouts after soft pressure, corridor or redevelopment announcement later. Then public capital entering at revalued prices while private insiders were already seated. It wasn't just one district, it was a method. At the center of the property chart, through 3 layers of controlled holdings, sat a quiet family office where Seo Do-hyun held operational signatory power. How did you get this? I asked. I stay alive by making myself useful to people who eventually hate each other. That is not a comforting answer. I did not offer comfort. Fair again. She handed me one photo. Seo Do-hyun entering a clinic building in another district 2 years earlier, flanked by the same consulting logo that had appeared on Mr. Nam's business card. So he doesn't just threaten after the fact, I said. No, he said sequence. There was that word again, sequence. Baek finally let go of the folder. The dinner tomorrow is not for persuasion, it is for classification. They want to know whether you can be priced. What if I can't? Then they move you into a different column. Which column? This time she actually smiled, thin and unpleasant. The one usually labeled complication. I took the folder and left with my heartbeat too steady, which is how I know I was truly worried. The dinner happened in a private club near Namsan, where the staff wore gloves, and the walls were covered in art chosen specifically not to offend anyone powerful. Seo Do-hyun greeted me like we were old acquaintances reconnecting after some minor scheduling inconvenience. Mr. Kang, I'm glad you came. That makes one of us. He laughed softly and guided me into a room where 3 others waited. A fund allocator, a former deputy minister, a woman from a private bank who never once gave her title and therefore obviously outranked everyone else. Dinner started with broad questions: market structure, policy distortion, retail behavior in uncertain cycles. They wanted tone first, not information. Were my instincts resentful, greedy, reckless, or recruitable? I kept it simple. Most pricing errors come from people mistaking access for intelligence, I said at one point. The private banker lifted one eyebrow. And what do you mistake intelligence for? Timing that survives contact with reality. Seo Do-hyun smiled into his water, a useful answer. No, a cautious one. Midway through the second course, he finally shifted the conversation where he wanted it. The West Medical District has become a sentimental story. Those can be messy. It would be unfortunate if a few small businesses were encouraged into a fight too large for them. I set down my fork. It would be more unfortunate if a few large men assumed small businesses were furniture. The former deputy minister chuckled like we were trading witticisms. That's how these rooms protect themselves. Everything becomes civilized so nobody has to admit they heard the blade. Seo Do-hyun leaned back. You have talent. I say that without irony, but talent gets wasted when it attaches itself to local noise. There are broader rooms. There are, I just don't respect most of them. This time the private banker did smile. He shifted again. That was the move, not direct pressure, offer plus warning. There may be a place for someone with your instincts in a more strategic environment. Independent allocation, better information, less need to improvise. You mean a seat? I mean an adult room. I thought about Hirai boxing records, Mr. Nam hiding sanitation notices in a flour tin, Mrs. Choi threatening intruders with a mop. Adult room. What makes you think I want one? The smile faded from his face by less than a degree. Most people want access once they understand the cost of standing outside. I already understand costs. Do you? He let the words hang. Then my water glass caught the light, and for one razor second I saw another version of the room. Same table, same paintings, but the chairs were pushed back. One of the servants was gone. Seo Do-hyun stood by the window with his phone to his ear, saying my sister's district name in a voice stripped of charm. On the table in front of my empty seat sat an envelope and a clinic photo. The image vanished. I stood up. Not dramatically. I just stood and adjusted my coat like the dinner had ended for me 3 breaths early. I appreciate the meal, I said, but if this is the part where respectable people pretend concern while discussing my family over fish, we're done. The former deputy minister blinked. The private banker watched me like I had finally become interesting. Seo Do-hyun didn't rise. That sounds emotional. No, I said, this sounds emotional. I took the clinic photo I had not physically seen but now knew would enter the room soon, looked at the sideboard behind him, and spotted the corner of a cream envelope tucked beneath a folder there. I walked around the table, pulled it free, and tipped its contents onto the polished wood. 3 surveillance shots of the district, one of them centered on Hirai locking the clinic door. The silence after that was clean enough to cut with. The private banker looked from the photos to Seo Do-hyun without changing expression. That was the first crack in the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Next time, I said, don't invite me to dinner if what you really mean is extortion. Then I left. The hallway air felt thin. Behind me, I heard nothing for 3 full seconds. That was how I knew I had done something expensive. I expected retaliation the next day. What I got instead was speed. At 8:05 a.m. here I called. They sent health inspectors. I was already out the door before she finished the sentence. By the time I reached the district, 2 city vans sat outside the clinic, and 3 inspectors were inside asking for storage logs, refrigeration records, staff rosters, and 1 paper they had absolutely no right to request on that timeline. Here I stood at the nurse's station with perfect posture and the face she used for arrogant specialists. Park Yunmai was there too, thank God, legal pad open, smile sharp enough to file with. 1 inspector looked up when I entered. Family members should not interfere with public review. Park answered before I could, and public review should not exceed statutory scope in a district already under procedural challenge, yet here we all are. Beautiful. The lead inspector tried to keep the tone official, but the room was off balance now. Mrs. Choi had 3 other tenants in the waiting room by coincidence. Mr. Nam had brought pastries. The salon owner was loudly asking whether her own pressure notices should be submitted to the same review officer. A local assembly aide was on the way with a photographer. When small people stop being separate, the choreography falls apart. The inspectors left after 40 minutes with less than they wanted and more witnesses than they liked. Outside, Hirai finally let herself exhale. How bad was dinner? Bad enough that breakfast came with inspectors. She pressed her fingers to her temple. I hate that this sentence makes sense now. So do I. That afternoon, Seonjin got hit with a document request from regulators. Publicly minor, privately catastrophic. Heedham tried a denial call with select clients and made it worse by sounding rehearsed. One of the regional banks began restricting internal discussion about reserve exposure, which is corporate language for panic in a tie. I sold more into the drop and shifted capital again, not because I enjoyed any of it, because the storm line was moving and if I didn't move with it, it would run me over. Yoon Seo met me late that night on the rooftop of her building, because she had developed a superstition that ground floors were for people who wanted to be overheard. The city spread out below us in wet light and exhaust haze. I have a producer ready to air the first moon clip, she said. Too early. I know. Then why are we here? Because I want you to say it to my face so I don't do something reckless at 2 in the morning. That was fair. If we drop Moon now, I said, they attack the source, call it selective editing, and bury the district under a national circus before the tenants have protection. She paced once to the ledge and back, and if we wait too long, then we miss the moment when the reserve structure cracks from inside. She stared out over the rooftops. I hate that you're right when you're most annoying. I work hard at it. She didn't smile. I also got something else. From her coat pocket she pulled a photo of a parking garage meeting taken from far away through a windshield. Blurry, grainy, still clear enough. Han Minyi, Seo Do-hyun, and the private banker from the dinner. They met tonight after you walked out, she said. No audio, but my source says the bank is worried the reserve freeze risk is real if withdrawals accelerate. There it was again, freeze risk. The future had shown me the room. Reality was now walking toward it. The next week broke apart into the fastest series of scenes I had lived through since the subway vision. A television panel arguing over selective disclosure. Han insisting all advisory materials were hypothetical. Mr. Nam finally speaking on camera, flower still on his sleeves, saying nobody uses the word hypothetical when they are trying to force you out before your rent even renews. Hirai doing one carefully worded interview on local radio that made her sound calmer than any of us felt. Park widening the district action into a fair process petition, joined by 8 tenants and 1 church office. A junior ministry analyst leaking a note about reserve sub-fund mismatches and then vanishing from her desk for 2 days. And threaded through all of it the market. This is the part people imagine is glamorous because they see numbers move fast and think fast means exciting. Mostly it means nausea, tabs open everywhere, coffee gone cold, and the strange intimacy of watching fear become math in real time. I trimmed, added, hedged, sold strength, bought structural panic, avoided the stupid temptation to swing at every rumor. Real edges survive noise, fake edges die begging for volume. The only time I lost composure that week was Wednesday night when I got home and found my apartment door slightly open. Not forced, unlatched. That is worse. I stood in the hallway and felt my body split into pieces, one part listening, one part checking the lock plate, one part already angry, one part counting possible mistakes. Inside, the apartment looked almost untouched, which again is worse. Chairs where they had been, books on the shelf, laptop gone from the table, no, still there, kitchen light off, window closed. Then I saw the desk drawer open. They hadn't come to steal, they had come to measure. I moved room to room carefully and found only one thing missing. The cheap decoy notebook I kept full of intentionally useless scribbles, half-false codes, and one phone number leading to a prepaid line I no longer used. Good. Then I saw the blood. A tiny smear on the drawer handle, dry, reddish-brown, no bigger than a thumbnail. Suddenly, the elevator vision with blood on my cuff made sense in reverse. Not my blood, someone else's. I called Seo first. Are you hurt? Not yet. That is the least comforting sentence in the Korean language. Someone was in my apartment. She was there in 12 minutes with a camera, gloves, and the expression of a person mentally revising all earlier opinions into stronger language. We photographed everything, called one contact we could trust, lifted what prints we could before the room cooled back into ordinary. At the bottom of the drawer, beneath the decoy notebook, lay a paper I had not left there. One line typed in clean black letters. Adult rooms have many doors. I should have been scared. I was, but under the fear was something harder. They were no longer just pressing district tenants and sending inspectors. They were in my apartment leaving stationery. Good, arrogance leaves fingerprints. The blood smear turned out to matter. A building camera caught a man in maintenance coveralls slicing his hand on the inner latch when he entered and wrapping it with tape in the elevator on the way out. The fake badge on his belt linked to a subcontractor used by a facility company that had once billed, through 2 shell layers, one of Seo Do-hyun's property vehicles. Not enough for a courtroom, perfect for a story. We still didn't publish it, we banked it. The reserve finally cracked on a Monday that started calm. Those are always the worst ones. Quiet open, routine chatter, analysts pretending the weekend changed nothing, 3 green candles in boring names, 1 red blip nobody wanted to respect. Then at 10:11 the first major client redemption rumor hit the private terminals. At 10:19 a second bank note recommended temporary caution around mobility-linked special vehicles. At 10:27 one anchor used the phrase liquidity mismatch on air. By 10:34 my phone would not stop vibrating. I pulled up every exposure chain I had mapped. HEDM, partner banks, reserve supplier names, municipal contractors over-levered to corridor financing. Then the compliance software firm that had looked stupidly boring 2 weeks earlier and was now the cleanest place to hide in the entire mess. I moved hard, not all in, never all in, just hard enough to matter if I was right and survive if the timing slipped. The screen glare on my terminal warped and suddenly I was there again. Snow outside, 5 phones, trade ticket in my hand, television saying the word freeze in a voice so controlled it was almost obscene, and on the conference table behind me in this newer version, a folder stamped emergency alignment session. One extra detail this time, a date on the corner screen, Thursday. 3 days. I came back to the office floor with sweat cold under my shirt. Seo answered on the first ring. What? Thursday. That is not a sentence. Reserve freeze window, Thursday, build everything around that. She didn't waste a second asking how sure I was. Then I need the moon clip package ready by Wednesday night. Not the full one. I know, the one where he says legality is modular. That line will start fires. Exactly. That afternoon felt like standing on a beach watching the tide pull out too far too fast. Some people noticed and ran. Most looked at the exposed sand and saw opportunity. Seo Do-hyun called me personally at 4:02. You've become inconvenient. You sound tired. He ignored that. There is still a graceful exit available. Does it involve my sister receiving fewer inspectors? It involves perspective. I looked at the market depth on Hedom while he spoke. Offers thinning, buyers cautious. Fear is a beautiful translator. Here is my perspective, I said. You people mistook sequence for ownership. A beat of silence. Then very quietly, Thursday will be difficult for amateurs. He hung up. Good, now we both had a date. Tuesday night, the district held its first open tenant meeting in the church basement because every other room available was either too small or too compromised. Folding chairs. Mike that worked only when hit gently on the side. Water dispenser humming near the wall. It was the least impressive stage imaginable, which made the courage in it feel even more real. Hirai spoke for 5 minutes. No drama, no big rhetoric, just the simple truth. That small clinics, shops, and tenants were being pressed before any fair public process. That policy language had been used like a weapon. That ordinary people deserved to know whether the city's plans were real before private money was allowed to position around them. People listened because they recognized themselves in her voice. Mr. Nam spoke after her, then the salon owner, then an elderly landlord who admitted he had been approached to sign an option agreement he had not fully understood. The room kept getting fuller, not because a basement suddenly became exciting, because once ordinary people believe the story is also theirs, they bring chairs. I stood in the back by the coats and watched it happen. This was what Moon had meant when he said danger begins when small people decide the process is personal. He had not said it with respect. He had said it with caution. He was right to. Wednesday afternoon, Yoon-se aired the first short clip. Not the whole executive review. Just Moon's voice, calm and unmistakable, saying legality is modular. That phrase detonated exactly the way I hoped. Not on the street first, in boardrooms, in legal departments, in investor calls. Because the second powerful people hear one of their own speak too plainly, they stop debating morality and start calculating who else has heard it. The clip ran on television, then online, then in every finance chat group worth fearing. Moon's office called it selective manipulation. Han called it malicious distortion. Seo's team called it politically motivated editing. None of them called the voice fake. Which was all I needed. I market closed, the reserve-linked names looked like wounded animals. I went home early on purpose, showered, changed, and laid out 3 phones on the table beside the laptop like I was setting surgical tools before a bad operation. One for calls, one for secure messages, one for nothing but market alerts. Hirai came over around 8 with takeout, and the face of somebody trying not to ask whether the world was about to end. How bad tomorrow? Bad? That helps no one. I know. She set the food down and crossed her arms, then helped me usefully. I looked at her and chose the version closest to the truth. Tomorrow is the day the people above the district start worrying more about each other than about us. Is that good? It can be. Can also means can fail. Yes. She sat on the edge of the sofa. Then tell me what to do if it fails. So I did. Backup lease, backup records, which lawyer to call first, which folder mattered most, which cabinet at the clinic had to leave before anything else, which contact Park had lined up for emergency media if we needed sympathy faster than process. When I finished, she nodded once. Dr. Calm, sister terrified, same face. Before she left, she touched the wallet in my coat, where the folded note with Moon's name still sat. You do know you don't win every fight just because you saw part of it early. I know. Good. She hugged me then, hard and fast, like she was annoyed with herself for doing it. Then she was gone. Thursday opened red. Not panic red, worse, careful red. The kind professionals use when they want the market to discover trouble in stages. Heat 'em down. Bank exposure names soft. Liquidity-sensitive contractors slipping. The reserve sub-fund itself not halted yet, but moving like a door that already knows the lock is about to turn. At 9:48, Yunseo texted. Ministry source says emergency alignment meeting started. The exact phrase from the vision. At 10:03, the second moon clip dropped, this one wider, enough to show the room, not just the voice. Han, Seo, moon, snow outside, the whole architecture of respectability compressed into one polite conspiracy. At 10:11, the first institutional redemption notice leaked. At 10:17, the holding company's spokesperson appeared on television, insisting all reserve obligations remained manageable. At 10:22, my screen flashed and the future window aligned perfectly with the present for the first time since this whole nightmare had begun. Same room, same phones, same ticker, same banner warming up beneath the anchor's face. National Mobility Reserve temporarily suspends redemptions pending review. There it was. I signed the trade ticket. Not because I thought I was clever, because once the future and present finally overlap that cleanly, hesitation turns into waste. I increased the hedge, cut the vulnerable long, and pushed size into the two beneficiaries I trusted most to survive the blast. Then I sat completely still and let the rest of the room run past me. At 10:31, the freeze became official. Nobody on the floor shouted. That only happens in bad movies. Real panic is quieter, heads turning too fast, phones lifted without sentences ready, managers walking harder, screens refreshing like they can reverse time if clicked often enough. My own phone buzzed with 3 calls in a row. Unknown, Seo Do-hyun. I let the first 2 die and took the third. His breathing was controlled, which meant he was furious. You think this ends with a fund gate? I think it starts where people can finally see it. Enjoy your visibility while it lasts. Then the line cut. By noon, the district story and the reserve story were the same story everywhere that mattered. Selective district pressure, insider corridor positioning, reserve structure mismatch, executive review video, moon in the room, small people personal, it all fused. I should have felt triumph, mostly I felt tired. Because even then I knew a machine that large does not die in one day. It sheds names, sacrifices tears, blames process, calls itself shocked. The fight just changes floors. Still, some days matter because they force the higher room to admit it exists. By the time the market closed, Heedham looked broken. Seo's office had gone dark. Han was nowhere on camera, and the district tenants had more protection than they had a week earlier because nobody wanted a fresh local abuse story attached to the national blast. That night the church basement overflowed. Not with victory. With relief, anger, rumor, TV crews, legal volunteers, bored kids, exhausted merchants, and people who had spent too many months being told nothing personal was happening to them. Hirai stood near the back handing tea to an old woman from the dry cleaner. Mr. Nam was on his third explanation of what a reserve freeze actually meant. Mrs. Choi was bossing a cable producer away from patient files like she owned the Constitution. It was beautiful in the least beautiful way possible. I stepped outside for air and found Yunseo leaning against the wall under the church neon. "We did it," she said. "No." She laughed once. "You are incapable of a normal answer." "We broke a layer." "Fine, we broke a layer." That was closer. Snow had started by then. Not much. Just the first thin flakes turning visible in the streetlight. I looked up and suddenly understood why the vision room had snow at the window every time. It had never been symbolic. It had just been accurate. The storm really had been this week. Yunseo nudged my arm. "You are doing the face again." "What face?" "The one where the room looks solved to everyone else and worse to you." I looked down the block at the district lights, the camera vans, the crooked sign over the bakery, the clinic windows still lit because Hirai never left early even inside chaos. "Moon wasn't the top," I said. She went still. "You know that or you suspect it?" "Both." "Based on?" I took out the folded note with his name, and then the second note I had written that first day after the vision expanded. Chairman Moon had been on the file cover, not above it, on it. "Men like him don't freeze on camera unless someone higher let the room exist," I said. "He was central, not final." She closed her eyes for a second. Great, fantastic, wonderful. I was worried life was becoming manageable. I almost smiled. Then my spare phone buzzed with a secure message from an unknown number. One line, no greeting. If you want to know who built Moon, come alone tomorrow, noon, Incheon Freight Annex. Ask for the room with no windows. No signature. I showed her the screen. She read it twice. That is the worst invitation I have ever seen. Agreed. Are you going? Snow touched the top edge of the phone and melted there. Yes, I said. I did not tell Hirai where I was going. I told her I had a meeting near the port and would keep my phone on. That was already more detail than a sane person should have given. Yoon Seo objected on principle, style, logic, and volume. You are not going alone to a room specifically described as having no windows. I know. That sentence means nothing if you still go. I'm still going. She paced my apartment while I checked the spare battery pack, the cockpit drive, and the thin folder of notes I was willing to lose. The room looked like every bad choice I had made recently had decided to sit down together. We can send someone else. Who? She didn't answer. Exactly. In the end, we compromised the way reckless people always do. I went in. She stayed close enough to make me nervous and far enough to stay deniable. Kwon, after one long silence on the phone, agreed to keep a car moving near the annex because he said only an idiot would walk blind into freight property during a reserve freeze, and I was apparently his preferred idiot. Incheon looked different after the freeze. All logistics zones do. Ports are never truly calm, but there are versions of calm. One is orderly. The other is a room holding its breath while the men above it argue about blame. The roads near the freight annex had that second feeling. Truck lines thinner than usual. Security tighter in visible ways and sloppier in invisible ones. Too many people pretending to follow routine while checking their phones every 10 seconds. The building I had been sent to was a squat concrete block beside a row of bonded warehouses and stacked blue containers. No sign, no windows on the lower level, one camera over the side door, a place built for things that need to be somewhere without technically being anywhere. I told Yoon Seo I was at the entrance. She sent one reply. If I hear one gunshot, I am becoming the worst version of myself. Comforting. A guard inside the door looked up from a folding table and saw the folded message in my hand. He didn't ask my name. He just jerked his chin toward a corridor lined with gray-painted walls and old fluorescent strips. Last room. The hallway smelled like cold dust and machine oil. My footsteps sounded too loud. There are corridors that feel administrative and corridors that feel prepared. This one felt prepared. The last room really had no windows, steel table, 4 chairs, 1 kettle, 1 wall-mounted clock running 2 minutes slow. In one corner sat the man from the records alley with the cut arm, now in a sling under his coat. So that was our source. He looked worse than before, and much less accidental. You took the drive, he said. You dropped it. I didn't drop that one by mistake. He gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing a second longer, checking door position, sealing corners, the cheap vent, his shoes. No one else visible. That meant nothing. I am, he said. You can use the real name if you want. Nobody at my level survives by pretending anonymity is protection. I said. He slid a slim ledger book across the table. Not a dramatic black book, just a worn planner with tabs and coded initials on each page. Columns of dates, vehicle names, district tags, reserve references, and side allocations. Handwritten, then later corrected in print. The sort of book somebody keeps only because at some point they stopped trusting every screen in the building. Why me, I asked. Because the freeze changed the incentive structure. That was a professional answer if I had ever heard one. Meaning? Meaning before yesterday I was disposable. Today I am also dangerous. That gives me a small window in which other people might prefer I talk to the right enemy instead of the nearest prosecutor. You think I'm the right enemy. I think you're the only one stupid enough to fight men above your salary bracket and smart enough not to post the whole thing online for applause. I almost respected him. He tapped the ledger. Moon did not build the reserve. He inherited its visible side. The reserve was designed as a shock absorption vehicle after the first transport funding panic 6 years ago. Officially, it exists to smooth national mobility infrastructure volatility. Unofficially, it became a staging pool for policy-linked entry before public rollout. By who? He hesitated, then wrote 2 initials on a scrap of paper and turned it toward me. CK. I looked up. Who is CK? Chairwoman Ki Kang HWA. The name hit a place in my memory money had already carved out. Ki Kyung HWA, head of Chung Group's strategic foundation, public philanthropist, infrastructure futurist, frequent panel guest whenever television needed an elegant rich person to say the word resilience without blushing. Moon I could imagine in the room. Ki I had not been looking for, which meant she was exactly the kind of name worth fearing. I am kept going. Moon provided institutional cover. Seo provided committee sequencing, hand-translated policy into product language, but the architecture came from the Ki side, not for one district, not for one corridor, for a national urban repositioning model tied to transport, medical clustering, logistics hardening, and post-disaster allocation. I stared at the scrap and felt the ceiling rise and drop at the same time. So Busan, the West District, the Reserve freeze. All linked by one playbook: distort perception, move price, clear resistance, enter early, publicize later, normalize in hindsight. He said it like he had repeated it enough times to stop hearing the human cost. What do you want in return? 3 things. Of course. First, if this goes public, you don't make me sound noble. I am not. Second, if I disappear, a copy goes to a foreign wire. Third, if your district survives this cycle, you remember the game is national, not local. I could work with all 3. He opened the ledger to a marked page. One line carried Moon's office shorthand, another Seo's committee marker, then a third, coded only with CKSF, matched against entries for district pre-acquisition sweeps and a series of private site review dinners. One date stopped me cold, the date of the Gangnam investor briefing. Another was next week. What's this one? He looked at the date. SF means sovereign facilities. Sovereign as in government. Sovereign as in state adjacent enough to bury accountability in national planning. The room seemed even more airless after that. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Yoon Seo probably asking if I was alive. I left it there. I slid another item across the steel table, a building access card. This gets you 1 floor below the public archive, in the Reserve Operations Tower. I love when blackmail comes with office access. It's not blackmail, it's timing. Same disease, cleaner tie. Before I could ask the next question, the hallway outside changed. Not loudly, just enough. A door further down opening too fast. 2 pairs of steps instead of 1. Men who know where they're going always sound different. I'm heard it too. His face didn't fall. It tightened like someone checking an old wound. You should go. Who knows I'm here? Enough people. That was honest enough. I stood and took the ledger, the card, and the scrap with Key's initials. I reached for the kettle, lifted it, and pointed with his chin to the vent cover near the floor. Back maintenance passage, it opens into the loading yard. I like you less every minute. That is sensible. Then the first fist hit the outer door. Not loud, controlled. Somebody with a key announcing himself physically before using it. Didn't look at me again. He walked to the main door and stood in front of it like a tired clerk about to answer a complaint. I crouched, ripped the vent cover free, and slid into a narrow service crawl that smelled like hot dust and old rain. Bad angle, tight fit, no space to turn. Exactly the kind of route desperate buildings keep for desperate problems. Behind me, I heard the outer door open. Where is he? I'm answered too softly for the words to carry. Then a shove, metal chair scraping, somebody swearing. I crawled faster. The passage ran 20 feet, turned once, and ended at a loose panel opening above stacked pallets in the loading yard. I dropped down, landed badly, and almost lost the ledger. Somewhere behind the wall, the voices rose. Then a man in a dark jacket came around the pallet stack from the opposite side, already looking straight at me. So much for exits. He moved fast, Not security fast, trained enough to trust momentum. I threw the access card at his face. It wasn't elegant, but it bought half a second. He flinched. I stepped in, caught his wrist, and drove him into the pallet edge hard enough to knock the breath out of him. He came back with his elbow. It clipped my shoulder and spun me. I hit the concrete, felt the ledger slide, saw his hand reach for it, and grabbed the nearest thing on the ground, a loose steel strap buckle, and slammed it across his knuckles. He cursed and pulled back. Blood opened along 2 fingers. There was the blood from the vision, just late, not early. He swung again. I ducked and went low, drove my shoulder into his waist, and sent both of us into a stack of plastic crates. They crashed over us loud enough to wake the whole yard. Somewhere to the right, a forklift horn blared in outrage at life itself. He was stronger than me. I was angrier and had fewer expectations of grace. I grabbed his cut hand and bent until he let go of the ledger and screamed. That was when Kwon's car came screaming around the warehouse corner like a man deciding subtlety had become a luxury. The passenger door flew open before the wheels stopped fully. "Get in." I didn't ask questions, I got in. The ledger came with me, so did a stripe of his blood across my cuff. As we shot out of the yard, I looked back once. The man in the loading area was still bent over his hand. No one chased immediately. That worried me more than if they had. Kwon drove one-handed and swore with extraordinary calm. "You were in there 8 minutes, 8. Good to know we both count in crisis. Do you have it?" I held up the ledger. "Then congratulations," he said. "You are now officially too expensive to ignore." Seo was waiting in the underground garage 3 districts away, leaning against a concrete pillar with both arms folded. When she saw the blood on my cuff, her eyes widened once and then narrowed into murder. "Tell me that's not yours." "Mostly not." Mostly is a terrible word. We moved to a storage room beneath one of her producer friend's offices and went through the ledger under a single strip light, while the city above us argued about the reserve on television. Line by line, district by district, the pattern widened. Busan, Daejeon, Incheon Harbor Fringe, West Medical District, a university-adjacent rehab zone outside Suwon, old market blocks near future station routes, warehousing belts scheduled for resilience upgrades after storm damage. Every time the same structure: early pressure, controlled fatigue, preferred access, public explanation later. And there, threaded through different initials and coded side notes, the Chung Group Strategic Foundation through its consulting arms and urban resilience grants. Kyung HWA had never needed to appear in the room if the room had been built around her logic from the beginning. Seo set both palms flat on the table. "So Moon is the face they can sacrifice." "Yes." Seo is the political mechanism. "Yes." Han is the translator. "Yes." And Ki is the architect. I looked at the ledger again. That is what this says. She let out a long breath. "I hate rich visionaries." Kwon, standing by the door, spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. "You are still thinking too small." We both looked up. He tapped one page near the back of the ledger. I had seen the initials before but treated them like another side structure. He pushed harder. "Read the locations." Incheon, Busan, West District, North Logistics Corridor, Flood Recovery Staging Lot, Military-Adjacent Rail Transfer Zone, National Clinic Clustering Pilot. I felt the shape before the words formed. This isn't just urban repositioning. "No," Kwon said, "it's continuity planning." "For what?" He looked at the fluorescent light like it personally offended him. "For controlled breakdown." That room went cold in a way no weather can manage. Kwon kept talking. "You think they only profit from growth. That's because you're still thinking like a trader. Men at that level also profit from stress, floods, transport failures, medical displacement, fuel disruptions. They don't just price the next clean city, they price the next damaged one too." The ledger entries suddenly rearranged in my head: post-storm allocation, emergency warehousing, clinic clustering, mobility reserve. Not only a playbook for policy leakage, a playbook for crisis routing. "Who else knows this?" I asked. He gave a thin shrug. "People who benefit, people who built it, maybe 1 or 2 who got pushed aside while the model became more ambitious." "And you?" I work near ports. Ports hear the future in freight volume before television names it. I hated how much sense that made. We copied everything twice that night and split it 3 ways. One set with Park through council privilege. One set with Yoon Seo's broadcaster under encrypted hold. One set with me in a place even I disliked enough to trust. The access card stayed in my wallet beside Moon's name and Key's initials. My coat was starting to feel like an archive for threats. I did not sleep. The next morning, every screen in the city seemed to show one of 3 faces. Moon pretending shock, hand pretending distortion. A minister pretending the reserve freeze was a temporary technical measure unrelated to broader structural concerns. No one said Key's name. That told me the hierarchy was still intact. At the clinic, the district had crossed from fearful to stubborn. Tenants shared coffee. 2 volunteers from a legal aid group were cataloging notices on folding tables in the waiting room. A university student ran social clips from her laptop for the older shop owners who still distrusted everything with a password. The room looked messy, alive, and impossible to roll quietly anymore. Hirai pulled me into the supply room between stacked boxes of gloves and antiseptic packs. "You look horrible." "Thank you." "No, really, your shoulder is wrong." I had forgotten the hit in the yard until she pressed 2 fingers along the bruise, and I nearly bit through a curse. She looked up sharply. "What happened?" "Loading yard disagreement." Her stare could have peeled paint. "I am so tired of you saying sentences that belong in police reports." "Fair." She closed the supply room door with her heel. "Tell me the truth. Are we winning?" I thought about the reserve freeze, the ledger, the dinner photos, the maintenance man, the church basement, the still missing top layer above Moon. "We are becoming expensive to erase," I said. She considered that. "That is not the same thing." "No. But it is something." "Yes." Before I left, she shoved a wrapped ice pack into my hand and told me if I died dramatically, after surviving all this administrative evil, she would be personally offended. At noon, Yoon Seo called from the station. "They're moving Moon." "What do you mean moving?" "His office just announced he is taking temporary medical leave." "Of course, rich illness, the oldest elevator out of accountability." "Can we stop it?" "Not from leaving, but I have a cameraman at the private hospital and a second crew at the helipad on the off chance the old man suddenly becomes too delicate for traffic." I almost laughed. By evening, the broadcasters were chasing ambulances while the market chased blame. None of it mattered. The real question was whether Key would stay invisible and let Moon absorb the blast, or whether the reserve freeze forced her to protect deeper assets. I got the answer sooner than expected. At 7:18, a black sedan stopped outside Dehan Securities just as I stepped out of the building. Not flashy, not government, just expensive enough to turn ugly if you refused it publicly. The rear window lowered halfway. Inside sat a woman in a charcoal coat with silver at the collar and the expression of somebody who never repeats herself, because the room always moves the first time. Not Key herself, worse in some ways. Her secretary general, if the newspapers were to be believed. Lee Sun-young, the one who handled foundation operations and future city partnerships with the kind of smile people describe as elegant until they have to negotiate against it. "Mr. Kang," she said, "Chairwoman Key would like to correct a misunderstanding." I stayed on the curb. "By car?" "If you prefer rain and microphones, we can do it here." There was no rain, that was her point. I got in. The interior smelled like leather, tea, and managed consequences. She did not offer a hand. Good. I dislike symbolic civility when the room is already dirty. The car moved. "Let's save time," she said. "You now understand enough to become inconvenient and not enough to become accurate." That sounds like a line prepared for many people. It is. Most people hear it too late. We drove along the river, while the city lights slid over the window glass. "Where is Key?" I asked. "Working." "Nice to know someone is." She looked at me, not annoyed, just measuring. "You have interpreted the reserve structure as predation. That is simplistic." "Because the better word is stabilization." I laughed in spite of myself. You people really do believe language can wash anything. No, we believe systems outlive sentiment. There was that same disease again. Sequence, sentiment, stabilization. Powerful people love nouns that erase the face in the room. She continued. Korea is entering an age of cascading urban stress, climate events, medical concentration, transport choke points, population collapse in some zones and compression in others. The state cannot move at market speed, so market structures must move ahead of the state. By crushing tenants early, by preparing land, capital, and service continuity before public resistance locks the system. You are describing theft in a more expensive accent. For the first time, a little edge entered her voice. And you are describing national planning with the moral range of a neighborhood activist. Funny, the neighborhood activists seem more honest. The car slowed at a light. Outside, a couple under a convenience store awning argued over an umbrella like the country wasn't rewriting itself around them. Lee Sun-young folded her hands. Chairwoman Key asked me to offer you one chance to become useful instead of disruptive. Adult room again. Call it what you like. There is a position available in a strategic allocation unit being assembled outside formal reserve structure, independent enough to protect you, resourced enough to matter. And my sister's district will be handled fairly. I turned and looked straight at her. You people think fairness is a coupon. Mr. Kang, if you release what you have without understanding the architecture above it, you will not save the country from planning. You will simply hand planning back to slower, stupider men. It was the first intelligent defense I'd heard from their side, which made it more dangerous than the threats. What if I don't want your architecture? Then you had better be ready for the architecture you leave behind when this one collapses. We stopped under the overhang of a private gallery in Hanam. She didn't ask for my answer. She knew better. People like her are not selling. They are placing a final marker. As I opened the door, she added one more sentence. Tomorrow at 11, the Reserve Operations Tower will clear its lower archive ahead of an external review. If you are going to make a childish choice, make it before adults remove the toys. Then I was out on the pavement with gallery light behind me and traffic noise in front of me, staring at a building reflection that caught my face and turned black for a split second. In the black glass I saw the Reserve Tower lower level, badge reader, narrow hall, archive carts, and at the end of the corridor, a woman in a charcoal coat already waiting by a door I had not opened yet. When the reflection cleared, the sedan was gone. I called Seo. I hope you are sitting. I hate when you start like that. Tomorrow at 11, we are going into the Reserve Tower. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Of course we are, she said. The rest of that night ran on pure motion. There are moments when you can feel the next day pushing against the walls from the future side. Sleep becomes theater at that point. I still went home. I still set an alarm. I still lay down in the dark and closed my eyes because the body is stupidly loyal to routine even when routine has clearly been fired. I got maybe 90 minutes. At 6 I was at the kitchen table with the access card from IM. The Coppet building directory Seo had pulled through a producer's friend, and 3 coffees lined up like a dare. The Reserve Operations Tower sat just south of the river in a bland glass block, jointly used by a holding company back office, 2 fund administrators, and 1 government-adjacent planning institute that publicly denied sharing infrastructure with private allocation teams. Which meant, of course, that the useful floors were the ones nobody put on the lobby list. Seo arrived with a baseball cap, a thermal printer, and the kind of focus that usually precedes law violations. I brought visitor stickers, she said, dropping the printer on the table. That sentence should bother me more than it does. It would if you had standards left. Fair? Kwon showed up 10 minutes later carrying a paper bag from a bakery and wearing the same expression he'd probably use while announcing weather delays at a funeral. I am not going inside, he said before sitting down. I am here to tell you where the tower moves cash paperwork when it thinks cameras are looking in the wrong direction. He pulled a folded site sketch from his coat. Service elevator, courier bay, archive transfer hall, Fire stairs with one blind camera between floors 2 and 4. The man understood buildings the way some people understand gossip. "Why are you helping this much?" Seo asked. He looked at the sketch instead of at either of us. Because once continuity planning starts pricing collapse instead of merely surviving it, ports stop being infrastructure and become selection mechanisms. I dislike being selected by people who have never carried anything heavier than a policy deck. Good answer. We built the morning plan in pieces. Seo would stay above ground with press chatter and a soft rumor line ready in case we needed external noise. Kwon would park near the service lane and keep a delivery path open for 6 minutes at a time, no more. I would go in through the courier entrance on a staggered archive clearance window using the access card and one very boring gray file box. None of it sounded good when spoken aloud. That is how I knew it was probably the real plan. At 8 I stopped by the clinic. I told myself I was there to drop off the secondary backup keys Park had requested. That was a lie I didn't bother polishing. Hirai met me in the admin room, one sleeve still rolled from unpacking supplies. The district had changed again overnight. More cameras outside. 2 student volunteers sorting copies. Mr. Nam arguing with a reporter in the waiting room about whether flour on his jacket made him look unserious. She saw the keys in my hand and then my face. "What are you doing today?" "Administrative nonsense." "Try again." I set the keys down. "I have to check something before it's moved." "Moved where?" A worse answer. She crossed her arms. "You are not going to a normal office, are you?" "No." "Should I prepare to be angry now or later?" "You can save time and start now." She did not smile. "I'm serious." "I know." That was the awful thing about people who know you well. They can hear the difference between deflection and concealment even when you only shift your breathing. "What level is this on?" she asked quietly. "District level, moon level, higher." "Higher?" She looked away for a second, toward the waiting room where Mrs. Choi was telling someone to stop putting cameras near patient charts. Then back at me. "I don't want to promise you'll be careful. Careful is fake in your life now. I want you to promise you won't improvise past the point of usefulness." That was exactly the right demand. "I promise." "You better mean it." "I do." She took the backup keys, then pulled a folded thermal patch from the medicine cabinet and tossed it at my chest. "For your shoulder. I like romance better when it looks less clinical." "Go away." That was as close to affection as either of us could manage in a room full of files and pressure. By 10:30, the city had that metallic late-morning brightness that makes every building look more honest than it is. The reserve tower rose above the avenue like it had been assembled by people who thought transparency meant reflective glass. From the outside it looked ordinary: security desks, turnstiles, delivery lane, men with badges walking fast enough to imply usefulness. A boring corporate tower in a boring corporate district. That was what made it dangerous. The ugliest things in finance rarely happen in rooms that look villainous. They happen in places that would bore a tourist in 8 seconds. I wore a courier jacket 2 sizes too plain to remember and carried a gray file box labeled Retention Transfer Support. Seo had printed the sticker in my kitchen while muttering about capitalism. The service entrance guard barely looked up. Freeze days create their own camouflage. Everybody is too busy counting fire exits and legal exposure to study the furniture. He scanned the access card. The light stayed red once, then turned green. I walked in. The courier corridor was colder than the lobby and smelled like toner, floor polish, and overheated electronics. Carts lined one wall. A woman in a navy sweater pushed archive bins toward a side elevator without making eye contact with anyone. Good. Crisis makes workers careful but also narrow. Their minds stay on task and miss the extra shape in the hallway. I kept my pace flat, not slow enough to invite help, not fast enough to look late. Floor B2 opened into a records transfer zone full of metal shelving and plastic-sealed boxes stacked shoulder-high. Labels everywhere. Index codes, date ranges, fund names disguised as acronyms only regulars would parse at speed. Overhead the fluorescent strips buzzed like anxious insects. My future windows had always hit on reflective surfaces, Glass, monitors, train windows, elevator, steel. Here I had too many chances. Cabinet doors, security panels, shrink-wrap gloss. The whole floor felt like a field of possible warnings. At the far end of the room, a clerk with tired eyes pointed his pen at a sign-in sheet. Support archive goes left corridor, room C or D depending on designation. I let my eyes flick to the box label as though checking instructions I actually knew were nonsense. C. He nodded. That was it. One bored nod between me and whatever room the adults had decided to empty before review. I took the left corridor. The badge card from IM opened a side door halfway down with a soft mechanical click. Beyond it ran a narrower hall with no cameras visible at eye level, and no labels except a small frosted panel marked sub-level reference. That was the kind of euphemism money uses when it means secrets with filing standards. My phone stayed dark in my pocket. Good. If Seo had needed to abort, she would have called twice. I passed one office with the lights off, one conference room being stripped of wall charts, then reached a locked archive door with a black keypad and card reader. I held up the access card. Green. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected, and much worse than I hoped. Shelving units, sealed banker boxes, 2 rolling racks, one central table already half cleared, and on that table sat 3 piles under colored flags: public review, internal response, strategic continuity. Continuity again. I put the gray box down and moved to the table. The strategic pile held exactly the kind of thing people promise each other doesn't exist. District displacement matrices, post-event medical concentration maps, mobility choke routing by stress scenario, acquisition windows tied not only to planned transit but to forecast flood damage, clinic failures, and emergency service contraction. Whole neighborhoods reduced to timing diagrams. I took photos as fast as my hands would let me. Page after page, map after map. One deck showed a national pilot model with private continuity partners prepositioned to absorb service corridors after localized breakdown. At the top right corner sat the Chin Foundation logo beside 3 government-adjacent abbreviations and one name handwritten in blue. CK cleared for accelerated annex test after reserve stabilization. Accelerated annex test. Annex. Incheon Freight Annex. That room hadn't been a leak site, it had been a node. My mouth went dry. The brushed metal side of a file cart caught my reflection, and the room shifted. For one breath I saw the same archive 20 minutes later. Lights dimmer, alarm strobing, the strategic pile gone from the table, and at the door, Lee Sun-young in her charcoal coat, not surprised at all, speaking into her phone while looking straight at where I was standing now. The reflection snapped back. No time. I swept the top layer of the strategic pile into the gray box, took 2 more photo bursts, and backed toward the door. Then footsteps hit the corridor outside. Measured, not running, worse. Running means surprise, measured means confidence. My phone vibrated once. Not a call, a message. Out now, she is inside. Seo. I slid the box under my arm and moved into the hall just as voices turned the corner at the far end. One male, one female. I didn't need to hear the words to know the female voice. Calm, precise, Lee Sun-young. I took the side stairs instead of the main corridor and went down fast enough to hurt my shoulder with every rail grip. 2 flights, 3. Somewhere above me a door opened and closed. No shout yet. That meant they still preferred the appearance of order. Floor B1 landing. I shoved through the fire door into a document intake zone full of shredding bags and inactive printers. Nobody there. Good. Service exit ahead. Badged. Green light again. Kwon had been right. Buildings trust cards longer than they trust faces. The service lane outside was bright, open, and suddenly much too visible. One white delivery van idled at the curb with the back doors cracked. Kwon sat at the wheel smoking an unlit cigarette like he was threatening the weather. I threw the box into the back and climbed in. He pulled away before the doors fully shut. Only when we hit the second intersection did I let myself breathe. The pages slid across the van floor and one folder spilled open near my boot. At the top of the exposed page, in clean black print, sat the title that explained everything the reserve, the district, the freight annex, and the continuity language had been trying to become. Phase 2, Selective Failure Acquisition Model.